Peter III and Catherine the Great's marriage was filled with hatred on both sides, and Peter chose to show his scorn for his wife in a truly twisted method. Being a SAR in Russia is a bloody business. Just ask the Romanovs. But even though that imperial family has gone down in infamy, their ancestors, Emperor Peter III of Russia, met an even crueler fate. Born into immense privilege and then suffering an unbelievably tragic downfall. The story of Peter III is one of the great melodramas in Russian history. Peter's birth was a diamond-studded affair, especially when you consider that his father Charles was a duke, and his mother, Anna Petrovna, was a Russian princess. In fact, little baby Peter's grandfather was none other than Peter the Great, aka a big deal in Russia. But tragedy hit the young boy fast and hard. Peter was christened Karl Peter Ulrich on February 21, 1728. But the happy day quickly turned sour. After giving birth, Peter's mother, Anna, contracted a postpartum infection, passing soon after and leaving her child alone. With this tragic origin story, is it any wonder why Peter became a supervillain of Russian history? I came here with happy news, and you have been a terrible wife and a bad mother. Given all this Russian business, it might surprise you to know that Karl Peter Ulrich wasn't full-blooded Russian. He was actually part German as well. Peter's father, Charles, was a hard, ambitious man who wanted only one thing, power. So when Peter's mother perished, his father wasted no time with mourning, and instead started molding Peter into a man who could give him more influence. Not a great childhood, and the consequences were utterly devastating. When Peter was 14, his destiny arrived. His Aunt Elizabeth had become empress, and the childless woman named Peter as her official heir. But this came at a high cost. Elizabeth stipulated that Peter leave everything he knew to come live in Russia with her. And that wasn't all she had him do. According to some historians, Peter's upbringing under his stern father was woefully inadequate. Even before he got shuffled into Russia, Peter's education was lax. He did receive lessons in various languages and possessed a semi-respectable library, but that was about it. This would soon come back to bite him right where it hurt. Peter's Aunt Elizabeth didn't name him heir out of the goodness of her heart. Elizabeth wanted only one thing from her nephew, for him to give the dynasty heirs. To that end, Elizabeth quickly arranged a marriage with his second cousin, the woman who would become Catherine the Great. And spoiler, this did not end well. I wanted to talk to you. Firstly, meet Kokoina. This is my court and my rules. One of little Peter's tutors noticed a very disturbing tendency with the darling boy. Besides the usual laziness and arrogance, two traits that aren't exactly uncommon among rich little princes, Peter also showed remarkable cruelty to animals. Definitely more than just a simple character flaw. Peter and Catherine's relationship was doomed from the very beginning. Close in age, they met for the first time when they were both still children, and their first impressions couldn't have gone worse. You look taller in your portrait. Send her back. Catherine later wrote that she found Peter detestable, and Peter himself seemed to have no fondness for his future wife. According to accounts from Catherine herself, Peter had some very bizarre habits as a child. At age 10, Peter was apparently still obsessed with toy soldiers, and would be for long after this, and would have rather played with his little wooden buddies than romance her. But despite this weird example of delayed development, Peter was disturbingly mature in other areas. Catherine the Great's writings describing this time say that the 10-year-old Peter already had an outsized fondness for drinking. He allegedly liked to chug back all manner of drinks whenever he could manage it. Talk about a catch. Catherine couldn't have been more ill-suited for the future emperor. For one, she was reportedly incredibly attractive, while Peter was nothing to write home about. Even worse, Catherine was intellectual, curious, and precocious. All things Peter was, well, not. Unless you count throwing back drinks at age 10 as precocious. Despite these bad first impressions, Peter's aunt forced him to go through with the wedding, and the unhappy couple tied the knot on August 21st, 1745. They set up a new court at Oranienbaum Palace, which people dubbed the Young Court after the couple's youthful friends and relations. Accounts vary about Peter's appearance. Some of our only information comes from his wife, Catherine, who didn't exactly think the world of her new husband. Still, according to her, Peter was nothing less than grotesque, sickly, and pale. The future emperor of Russia also suffered from unsightly smallpox scars across his face. But at least Peter had a glowing personality to recommend him, right? Not so much. Caring all our lives, she gave me a twig. She's not another imbredish. According to his less than pleased wife, Peter had a mean streak in him that went hand in hand with his childlike behaviors. He apparently particularly liked playing practical jokes, as long as they involved someone getting hurt. Peter never loved Russia, but then again, he didn't exactly try. In fact, he was obsessed with Russia's sworn enemy, the Prussian King Frederick II. Peter also insisted on keeping his own private guard of German men rather than choosing people from the Russian court. This would be his downfall. Catherine had some choice nicknames for her husband. She called Peter idiot and good for nothing. How sweet. Catherine and Peter were obviously unhappy, but they hid even darker secrets behind bedroom doors. Catherine infamously took up a series of lovers, but Peter was eventually no monk in this department either. They were so distracted, Catherine even claimed they didn't consummate their marriage for years. As we'll see, this road led straight to scandal. Peter's chief mistress was Elvita Voronova, but she wasn't what you'd expect. Even her closest friends said Elvita swore like a soldier, squinted her eyes, smelled bad, and spit while talking. Catherine called her a very ugly, extremely dirty child. Peter, though, as we'll see, was somehow into it. Despite the fact that his entire court was flabbergasted at his new lady love, Peter placed Elvita in his most intimate confidences on both sides of the top sheet. When Peter became emperor, he put her room next to his own in the Imperial Winter Palace, earning her the title the new Madame de Pompadour. And that wasn't all. Peter's devotion to Alza led to some dark rumors, some of them likely true. Many of the Russian court whispered that Peter was planning to shove his wife Catherine in a convent in order to marry his mistress and live happily ever after. However, none of this came to pass, especially not the happy part. But don't all marriages have challenges? It's not love what you did. It's cowardice. Peter III became emperor on January 5, 1762, and his reign might surprise you today. Some experts even consider Peter a progressive ruler. In October 1754, Peter's empress birthed a son, Paul. The little boy ignited a scandal. Catherine later claimed that since she and Peter hadn't yet consummated their miserable union, the boy had belonged to her lover, Sergei Sultikov. If so, the Russian crown prince was illegitimate. But the truth is so much more complicated. Today, historians dare to contradict Catherine the Great, and their reason is hilarious. According to modern experts, the description of Paul as a stout, ugly man marks him as Peter's biological son. You see, Catherine and her lover Sergei were both extremely attractive, much too attractive to have created the unfortunately ugly child together. Peter, meanwhile, fit the bill. Despite Catherine's smear campaign, there's evidence to suggest Peter wasn't a total fool, and some sources point out his rationality and honesty. One time, his sycophants even wanted to build a gold statue in his honor, and Peter replied that there was much better uses for gold in Russia. In the end, Paul may have been the only child Catherine and Peter had together. Ah, amazing news! In the middle of something, a something not as important as Paul's first word. In any case, by the time Catherine was pregnant with their second child, Peter was wise to her games. His response to the birth was disturbing. He apparently only screamed at Catherine to go to the devil with her illegitimate child. For all Peter's progressive policies, he made one fatal error. Even though Russia was at war with Prussia and King Frederick II, Peter declared peace between the two countries as soon as he took the scepter. Instead of Russia's eternal respect, the move earned him the dubious title, the Betrayer. Though Peter was academically pretty hopeless, he did have one semi-intellectual hobby, playing the violin, but no word on if he was actually good at this, though. All in all, Peter III reigned for a measly 186 days, or about 6 months, and you wonder why we don't call him the Great. In July 1762, Peter III and Catherine the Great were in something of a stalemate. Then he made one fatal mistake, but more on that later. The next days of Peter's reign are some of the most infamous in Russian history. With the Russian court in her pocket, Catherine forced Peter to abdicate on July 9th, threw him behind bars, and then declared herself Empress of all of Russia. Catherine wasn't even finished yet, and she sent Peter to a remote village in Raptia. It was a far cry from the Winter Palace, but hey, Peter was still alive. Some believe Catherine intended to banish him back to his home of Holstein, which, to be honest, was probably what he wanted anyways. Too bad, that's not what happened. Catherine allowed Peter his dogs, a bed, and his violin while he was behind bars, but she denied his one heartbreaking request. Peter kept pleading to see his beloved mistress, Elizabetha, an appeal that the newly minted Empress Catherine was all too happy to deny. The thing is, Peter's nightmare was just beginning. Catherine the Great's coup of her own husband shocked the entire world, but the situation was about to get a whole lot more scandalous. On July 17, 1762, Peter was found dead in his cell. The once mighty emperor's body now lifeless and cold. But what happened to the former ruler of Russia? Catherine went through all the motions and gave Peter III an official autopsy, and the results were surprising in more ways than one. The attending doctors deemed that Peter had perished from a massive stroke, even though he was a trim 34 years old at the time of his passing. But the Russian courtiers had another idea. Peter's autopsy actually contained one more finding, and it was pretty embarrassing. In addition to the stroke, doctors claimed Peter had suffered from a fatal case of hemorrhoidal colic, i.e., his hemorrhoids hurt him so much he keeled over and bit the dust. It almost makes you wonder if Catherine was just messing with him at this point. Given Peter's love of drinking, there's a persistent rumor that while holed up in Raptia, the emperor got into a brawl with one of his captors and ended up accidentally dying. Sure, stranger and more violent things have happened in Russian history, but a much darker theory abounds. Peter had an eerie second life after his tragic end. People claim to be the long-lost emperor for years after, usually with tales about finally escaping rupture. One of these men, Ilan Pugachev, even started a full-blown rebellion until Catherine crushed it under her thumb and brutally executed him. Even after his passing, Catherine couldn't help dealing her dearly departed husband one final betrayal. She initially had him buried in Alexander Nevsky Monastery in St. Petersburg. Many Russians didn't consider it a place fit to bury a Tsar, but don't worry, this wasn't Peter's final destination. When Peter's son Paul succeeded his mother to the throne in 1769, he didn't forget about his father. Paul always had a chilly relationship with Catherine, and he took a posthumous swipe at her by exhuming Peter's body and having him rearied in St. Peter and Paul Cathedral with the rest of the Russian czars. In an irony to end all ironies, Paul had mom and dad buried together, and Peter now lies eternally beside the woman who bumped him from the throne. This is definitely not how to get your parents to love each other again. Plus, Paul may not have known one crucial detail about Peter's end. Peter III wasn't above petty frustrations and even pettier revenges. According to one source, the young Peter despised Latin with such an intense bitterness. He later banned all Latin books from his personal library. Peter was never supposed to take the Russian throne. Even though Russia was his father's deepest dream, people originally groomed the young noble for the Swedish throne, teaching him about Nordic patriotism and even schooling him in the Lutheran faith. Needless to say, the switch to Russia was a little jarring for the boy. There's one more ghost story about Peter, one that really takes bizarre to new levels. During World War II, people claim that Peter's specter saved children from a bombing of a schoolhouse at the old site of his place at Arnhem. At least somewhere in the world, someone remembers this guy fondly. One of Peter's biggest advancements during his reign is also the least talked about, even though it was actually a huge deal. You see, in the middle of backwoods Orthodox 18th-century Russia, Peter declared religious freedom. It was such a radical move. No Western European country had done it yet. We'll give props to Peter on this one. I suppose Peter III abolished the Secret Service in the Muscat palaces, considering them merciless and a holdover from a more savage and brutal time. A good guy move, but not a lasting one. As soon as Catherine snatched his throne, she reinstated those merciless officers. Not long into his marriage, Peter quickly gave up all pretense of actually liking his wife, and his scorn soon manifested in disturbing ways. Following what historians have called his corporal's mania, Peter had his men take aim and fire at Catherine's nearby private residences just for kicks. In July 1762, everything changed for Peter III, and not in a good way. You see, while he had been cozying up to Prussia and King Frederick II, his not-so-beloved wife, Empress Catherine, had been cozying up to his Russian courtiers and plotting his end. Peter eventually got wise to this, and his reaction was swift and brutal. That summer, Peter caught one of Catherine's co-conspirators and had the man detained as a warning shot to Catherine not to mess with him or his crown. Victory? Well, not really. They didn't call Catherine the Great for nothing, and she made sure her arranged husband's message blew up right in his face. It was this move that caused Catherine to take action and enact the plot to snatch the throne from her husband if he'd only left good enough alone. Today, it's pretty widely accepted that Peter was assassinated on purpose, likely at the hands of a courtier named Alexei Orlov. But that's not even what makes this theory so scandalous. You see, bloodthirsty Alexei was the brother of a man named Grigory Orlov, who just so happened to be in bed with Catherine the Great. Given this evidence, many have suggested that Peter's end came at Catherine's bidding. That closure might be nice for Peter's apparently real ghost, but it's also just as likely that Orlov acted without Catherine's consent. As one historian put it, the circumstances of his passing can never truly be known. Perhaps one of history's greatest mysteries. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. And don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more amazing facts about everything.